Here's my beach coming around nice and smooth. I've taken this back towards the background, the sky a little bit. I've drawn in my outline, the trees, the cliffs that come down here, and all this needs to be taken away, this red. The horizon here, which is far back, comes behind this piece of wood, this headland here, so I have to separate that out. This edge here doesn't need to be very accurate because it is going to be a tree line, but it's really getting this sky into the wood so that we're just a bit closer here. What I'm doing here is, you can see, being quite loose in how I carve this. This bit here is further back, so we can take that back a bit. But being quite sort of chunk. But on the tops of each ridge, I'm keeping the tool like so that it forms a sort of change of plane. So from here being flat to square, you can see that. So I'm going to overlay that with more cuts from the V-tool, and I'm going to overlay that with some cuts from gouges. And this is one of the cases that I know it sounds odd, but I think the way this wood can tear can give a lovely sense of roughness and cliff. So whereas I wouldn't normally consider tearing wood like this, there's something about being able to do that to the surface that gives sort of a sense of rockness that nothing else really will. Let me just show you this cut again. What I'm doing is I'm pushing in with the corner like so, and then deliberately breaking the wood like this. It looks awful, but what it does is it creates this little shadow. There's a whole type of carving that involves what the French called a coup d'effet, which is by making a cut like this and letting a bit fall over. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just sort of almost like picking the wood forward and letting it crumble, and that gives that rocky appearance. It's a little bit tricky to show you with the camera, but there is more detail here, and it's a little bit thicker from the background, from the sky, because it's closer to the viewer than down towards the end of the peninsula. And in fact, everything over here gets shallower, so we've only got 2 or 3 mil 1/8 of an inch from the background here. And the rocks and the details are much slighter, and that gives that impression of going away from the viewer. The trees are just implied with vertical cuts, a little bit of shadow. You'll find the grain will crumble a little bit here because it's very short, but that can look quite effective as well. So if I just turn it a little bit, you might be able to see how shallow this is. Something like that. So it's right up close to the background here. The rocks in the foreground here I've carved in the same way as the rocks on the other side. I've used this sort of rough chisel effect. But the one thing that I have done is I've made the main planes of the rock go in this direction towards the boat, like this. And they also are deeper because they're more in the foreground. So you're going to have to make this up a little bit as you go along, and I suggest that you do a little bit of experimenting on a spare piece of wood first. The last thing I'm going to do on the carving is to sand the boat. I want this to be very smooth to contrast with the textured surfaces elsewhere. So I'm going to start with something like 120 grit and work with the grain. And then when I've finished that and brushed it off, I'm going to move to 240 grit to finish it. Let me just show you this little trick with the sandpaper. I usually use little pieces like this, and I fold it into 3 like that. And what that does, that gives me 1, 2, 3 surfaces to sand with, and also 2 corners if I need them. So it's just a little trick that I use, 3-part sandpaper. I've only sanded the outside of the hull and the gunnel here and around to the top about there. All the inside, the sea and everything like that is left straight from the chisel. It's important also when you're sanding down here not to scratch that surface with the sandpaper. Okay, so we're left now with repairing this crack over here and then some sort of finish to the whole piece.